Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris. We are on Man's Search for Meaning, pages 51 through 70. And let me grab my copy of the book, and we're gonna take a look at what transpired over these pages. This was a pretty good one. Some pretty good passages and some insights from Viktor on this one, and let's start things off. Page 50, and what do we have here? We kind of left this off. This is kind of what I was talking about in the discussion from 31 through 50, how right at the end, right here at page 50, he talks about how when a man loses his values, he loses his sense of self. And when you do that, you become a part of what the camp wants you to be a part of. And what the camp wants you to be a part of is they want everybody to be the same and degrade you and make you feel like just an animal. The goal is to make everybody feel like that, so they can herd everybody in and give everybody an order and everybody follows it. Nobody can be different, right? And Viktor uses this language of sheep, like they became like sheep that can be herded, and people were trying to fight to get into the middle whenever they were being herded, so that they can stay clear of like the kicking and the beatings that people took on the outside of it, right? Because that's the crazy thing about being human, is how like just different that everybody is. Where I was trying to explain this to somebody about how you take a look at a squirrel, right? And yes, there's different squirrels and stuff. There's red squirrels, black squirrels, regular squirrels, but okay, take a regular squirrel. All those squirrels look alike, at least to me. To most people, they look alike. Yes, some are bigger, smaller, right? But in people, even if you have somebody, an entire group of white people, entire group of black people, Middle Easterners, yes, not even the skin color is the same. Because there's nobody's faces are the same unless maybe you're a twin. It's just everybody's so unique. However, in the camp, they want everybody to be the same because it makes it easier to herd everybody and to control everybody. Think about like in crops, in farming, if you have monocrops and a pest gets in there, it's going to take apart the whole crop field, right? Because you just got one crop there. But now, if you do plant a variety of crops and one gets a hold of a pest gets a hold of your soybeans, but yeah, they might really like soybeans, but then your wheat might be unaffected because that is specific to soybeans. You see what I'm saying there? Even so the officers are trying to get everybody the same, but Viktor here is saying that it was necessary to keep away from the crowd and to be alone in your thoughts and to have this privacy and solitude that he talks about on page 51. And probably very important for you to just try not to get too stressed out, to think things through, to stabilize yourself and just kind of escape into like artwork or nature, as we talked about last time and then the discussion. Continuing on, pages 52 and 53, he talks about how little of value was really given to was placed on human life in the camp. And he talks about how this story about First of all, they didn't have names, right? Remember, when they came into camp, you were only referred by your number. And he tells this story about this list of men, and they were transporting bodies. I'm trying to get it here. This is on page 53. There was a young prisoner whose brother was not on the list and therefore would have been left behind. The young man begged so long that the camp warden decided to work an exchange, and the brother took the place of a man who at the moment preferred to stay behind. But the list had to be correct. That was easy. The brother just exchanged numbers with the other prisoner. So this goes back to what I was saying just on the previous slide here, how they were trying to make you all the same. You are all the same. You are all the lowest of the low. You're all prisoners of this camp. Nobody here is different, to the point where you're just a number. The number is the only thing that's different about you. And as you can see here in the story, as long as they were just transferring bodies, they didn't care who they were transferring. So that's why I can imagine Viktor here in this passage using a little bit of humor in this, because he had an exclamation point here when he said it. Let's continue on, pages 54 and 55. And this was a story of Viktor being chosen to work because he was a doctor. He was working with a group of people who were sick. There was transport of sick patients from the rest camp. So they wanted to transport sick patients to a rest camp, but people didn't want to go to the rest camp because they thought that was just another word for you're going to die. You're going to go to a camp where they have gas chambers and a crematorium. Viktor was pegged to work on that transport. His name was on the list since a few doctors were needed. And like I said, and as he says here, but no one was convinced that the destination was really a rest camp. And then transport for the rest of the camp was arranged for the second time. There's ruse. The chief doctor, who had taken a liking to me, told me furtively one evening at 9:45, I have made it known in the orderly room that you can still have your name crossed off the list. And you may do so up till 10 o'clock. So this guy is trying to give him an out here, because this guy probably thinks, man, if I don't tell him and he gets on this transport, he will likely die. I need to tell him this. And this is very interesting what Viktor told him. He said, you know what? This is not my way, and that I had learned to let fate take its course. I might as well stay with my friends, I said. And this doctor, chief doctor, gave him a farewell, not for life, but from life. And he went and told somebody else. And the guy asked him, you really going with them? And he said, yes, I am going. And tears came to his eyes. So people are thinking that he's going to die if he goes on this transport. But what ended up happening was that it was not a ruse. It was not a death sentence. And they actually did go to a rest camp. And then Viktor, the previous camp that he left, went in like shambles. He talks about there was a famine that raged there, and cannibalism had broken out. How crazy is that? He left just in the nick of time, he talks about. Going to page 56, he talks about this story, the Death of Teheran story. And I tried to find some stuff on this, but I couldn't find any. I didn't look around for it. I didn't spend a lot of time looking for it, but there was this story, Death of Teheran, on page 56. And it goes like this. I'll read it. A rich and mighty Persian once walked in his garden with one of his servants. The servant cried that he had just encountered death, who had threatened him. He begged his master to give him his fastest horse, so that he could make haste and flee to Teheran, which he could reach that same evening. The master consented, and the servant galloped off on the horse. On returning to his house, the master himself met death and questioned him, "Why did you terrify and threaten my servant?" "I did not threaten him. I only showed surprise in still finding him here when I planned to meet him tonight in Teheran," said Death. So what is meant by that story? So this guy, scared of death, ends up getting a force to go to Teheran. Where death is going to meet him there. I'm trying to figure out what this story was really trying to tell. So the guy gets the horse, flees to Teheran, and he's going to meet death there later. So it's like, why was he even fleeing in the in the first place? Yeah, I was very curious about that. That's on page 56 as I have there. Let's continue on. And still on 56 here. This kind of goes to what Viktor was saying earlier when he was talking to the chief doctor. The chief doctor wanted to take him off the list of people that were going to this rest camp. And Viktor describes that the camp inmate was frightened of making decisions and of taking any sort of initiative whatsoever. This was the result of a strong feeling that fate was one's master and that one must not try to influence it in any way, but instead let it take its own course. Think about that. I think I understand what he is saying here. And think about the mentally draining aspect of making decisions, thinking things through, and having to take the responsibility to make a decision. Whereas under this approach, you don't have to worry about that. Whatever, you're just along for the ride. And as I write here, you don't waste the energy on trying to change things or take control of anything. You let God do that, or you let fate do that. I thought that was very interesting. And maybe this was something that separated the people who survived the camp, who didn't survive the camp. Because remember, the one thing that they could not take from you was how you reacted, your freedom of what you thought of the situation. That they could not take away from you. So maybe it was those people who did not always rely on fate, even though Viktor did earlier when he was talking to that chief doctor. Let's continue on. Viktor did, I spelled this wrong. Viktor did attempt to escape. This was first told on page 57. And I feel a sneeze coming. We'll just shut that down. On page 57, he talks about he had an escape attempt. A member somebody that he knew was going to try to smuggle him out of there. He had this opportunity to provide ourselves with provisions. A few round we were broken. So under the pretense of holding a consultation about a patient whose illness required a specialist's advice, he smuggled me out. And then outside the camp, they tried to find anything they could that would help them supply us, to provide us ourselves with provisions, a few rotten potatoes, and to look for a rucksack. So they broke into an empty hut of a women's camp, and they got some things. They saw some things in there: rags, straw, rotting food, broken crockery. He even talks about seeing a dead woman's body in there. And then he continues on, and eventually he decides that he does not want to go. How did he come to this decision? Well, from seeing his patients. The patients that he was trying to take care of who had typhus. And one of them asks him, "You, too, are getting out?" I denied it, but I found it difficult to avoid his sad look. After my round, I returned to him. Again, a hopeless look greeted me, and somehow I felt like it had been an accusation. The unpleasant feeling that had gripped me as soon as I had told my friend I would escape with him became more intense. So he's talking about the friend that smuggled him out of there. I ran out of the hut and told my friend that I could not go with him. And then that unhappy feeling left him. So he almost felt guilty for leaving. And maybe this goes back to the same thing that when his parents, he had that chance to get out of Austria, but he chose to stay for his parents. Maybe this is the same thing that consumed him in this instance. He had a chance to get out. He had a guy who could have made it happen to get him out of there, but he felt like it was his duty to stay with those patients that he was responsible for. The battlefront came nearer and nearer to the camps, so eventually they had to be evacuated and ordered to be burned down. So this is probably talking about like Allied forces coming in. So they move the prisoners, get them away from the warfare, and then burn down that camp I'm not sure why they would burn it down. Maybe to get rid of evidence so that they would not get in trouble from world and the law, although United Nations was, I think, established after this, but just, war crimes and such like that. Let's see, let's continue on. Page 60, oh yes. This was where Red Cross shows up. It's kind of interesting. From, where was it, Switzerland? Geneva. That is Switzerland, I believe. And the Red Cross brought, it's interesting here, they talk about bringing cigarettes. More importantly, though, boxes of medicines were unloaded from the car. Cigarettes were distributed. I wonder why they would bring cigarettes. Now, there was no need for us to risk running toward the fighting line because the battle was slowly coming towards them. And the Red Cross was saying one thing, the officers were saying another thing. So the Red Cross was saying assured us that an agreement had been signed and that the camp must not be evacuated. And then the SS arrived and brought the order to clear the camp. So that's interesting. The Red Cross didn't want the camp to be evacuated, but the SS did, and that's probably to do with the battle lines. They wanted to move the camp away from the battle. But you would think that the Red Cross would want the camp evacuated, free these people and such. I mean, Switzerland was very neutral, I think, in that time. So I wonder why they would want it evacuated. Ooh, excuse me. And let's continue on here, page 61. And eventually the battle did end up reaching the camp. He tells a funny story about hearing the noise of rifles and cannons, flashes, and somebody, upon hearing it, had jumped from his bed onto him and like woke him up. One prisoner jumped on my stomach from the bed above me, and with the shoes on, that awakened me all right. He says that with an exclamation point. Outside the pole at the camp gate, a white flag floated in the wind. So white flag is usually for surrender, but I wonder what he meant by that. If like the Germans were surrendering or the camp itself had surrendered. It wasn't very clear from this. Continuing on to page 62. Apathy. Remember, he talks about apathy being the second phase that the prisoners go through while they're in camp. And he was talking about on page 62 here how it's a defensive mechanism. But it's not just that, it also comes about from hunger and lack of sleep. These things also contribute to the apathy. And then maybe the apathy then contributed to this inferiority complex that the prisoners had in these camps. Oftentimes, before the camp, we talk about this a lot. You'd have a good job, you got a family, you're married, you got things going for you, you're high up in your company, you're somebody. But the camp turned you into nobody. They wanted everybody to be a nobody in there. At least, not all the prisoners, most of the prisoners, yes. But like we talked about the capos before and how they were high-standing prisoners that did the bidding of the Nazis. They didn't feel like that. They did not feel degraded at all, he said. They felt promoted. They felt some developed miniature delusions of grandeur, he said. And I'm sure that this did not rub off well. This is something I was thinking about, like when he first mentioned capos, like the first page, if you guys remember. How don't you want to beat these guys? These guys are you. They're prisoners too. But in their minds, they're not. They don't have the same mental anguish that you do. But they still are prisoners. But they're just not realizing, at what point do you just want to beat the hell out of these guys? Because they're treating you like that. These are your own men treating you like shit. And Viktor does talk about that, 63, how the degraded majority and the promoted minority came into conflict. The results were explosive. There was an irritability. Viktor even talks about sometimes clenching his fists in anger. I don't know where these guys would get the energy from that. If they're most of the prisoners, not being well fed, lack of sleep, where would they have the energy to come to come to fisticuffs with, the capos who had Nazis on their side. That's where the guns were, you know. Viktor didn't really talk too much about this. He didn't really go too much into detail here about like if he was involved in any like fights. Really, he did that one capo, the one that looked like a pig. Oh gosh, I lost my place. I remember him talking about he was so mad at him. I remember that. Inspections. This was page 64. Again, going back to the fact that they want you like everybody, and they want you nobody, just like everybody else, right? To the point where they lowered your self-esteem. Apathy had been ingrained. You were less than human, and it shows in what he's talking about here with the inspections. They'd come around to the like medical huts, I guess, the medical blocks. And they had patients in there who were dying, sick. They didn't even care about the patients. They cared more about the cleanliness of the hut than the people in it he was talking about. And he would have to tell them like the status, the number of people that were present and such. And they didn't care, though. They just wanted the place tidy. Tidy enough to check off, just to check the boxes. Who cares about these people? They're not even people. They're just a number. And we need to make sure the list is right. We need to make sure the numbers are right. Again, trying to get you to feel lower than human. What page was this on? How is a human being influenced? Page 65. How is a human being influenced? He talks about this on page 65. And this kind of ties along with what we've been saying about the conditions of the camp and how it influencing you, being a great effect on you. When he brings this up, I kind of have like visions of it like a nature versus nurture argument here. Are you a product of your upbringing? Are you a product of your genes? Or are you a product of the environment that you grew up in? There's this interesting like parable or story that I've heard before, where like a alcoholic father has two sons. One of the sons sees his father and grows up to be an upstanding citizen with a family and starts his own business. The other son sees his dad and becomes an alcoholic. Same genes, right? But two different outcomes, right? Same dad. They both saw him, but two different outcomes. So Viktor speaks on this on page 65. Is there no spiritual freedom in regard to behavior and reaction to any given surroundings? Is that theory true, which would have us believe that man is no more than a product of many conditional environmental factors, be they of a biological, psychological, or sociological nature? Is man but an accidental product of these? And then Viktor continues on. We can answer these questions from experience, as well as on principle. The experiences of camp life show that man does have a choice of action and spiritual freedom. He still has that choice. But I think Viktor here basically is saying, don't be a victim of those surroundings. I heard this quote before, that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. That's kind of what Viktor's saying here. You have a choice. You have a choice. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's own way, he talks about. You still have it. They wanted you to renounce your freedom. They wanted you to be, they wanted to mold you into a typical inmate, into the sheep, so you can be herded everywhere and controlled. You renounce your freedom, now you are under their control. It's kind of, that's what I think Viktor was talking about in this. And then, man can decide. You can choose your own way. These are some words that he uses. Let's continue on. Active versus passive life. An active life serves the purpose of giving man opportunity to realize values in creative work, while a passive life of enjoyment affords him the opportunity to obtain fulfillment in experiencing beauty, art, or nature. So it's a yin and a yang. You have an active and a passive life. Active and a passive life. So you have to get through your active life to experience the passive life. Is that kind of what he's saying here? It's, you have to give your life the purpose before then being able to appreciate everything that happened along the way. I don't know if I'm saying that 100%. Basically, you have to put in the work, and then later you can enjoy the fruits of your labor, basically, is what I was kind of getting at from those words. And let's see what else he has to say here. Suffering is an incredible, ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. That is true. That is true. I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about something similar, about how life is suffering. And it's interesting, this guy he's quoted before, Dostoevsky, once saying, "There is only one thing that I dread, not to be worthy of my sufferings." And this is going to be a challenge question that I pose to you all about what this really means, not worthy of my sufferings. So that the sufferings, not worthy of my sufferings, could this mean possibly that not putting in enough value into something? Suffering, not suffering for a worthy cause is maybe what he means by here. I am not sure. That's going to be a challenge question I pose to y'all. But he does says something here. He says something here on page 67. Here lies the chance for a man either to make use of or to forego the opportunities of attaining the moral values that a difficult situation may afford him, and this decides whether he is worthy of his sufferings or not. Could be something related to that. Let's continue on. This is page 69. He was talking about treating a dying woman. And the woman tells him that, "I am grateful that fate has hit me so hard," she told me. "In my former life, I was spoiled and I did not take spiritual accomplishments seriously." And I know I wrote something here, but now she was becoming friends with a tree. I know that sounds a little weird, but even Viktor thought it was a little weird. He kind of thought that she was transgressing into a delirium. And this is what he says. Was she delirious? Did she have occasional hallucinations? Anxiously, I asked her if the tree replied, "Yes." What did it say to her? She answered, "It said to me, I am here, I am here, I am life, eternal life." So I think this was an important story that Viktor told, that, we all have things that we probably neglect until it's the very last minute. Right? And it's important to have balance in your life. So you've got your spiritual energy, mental energy, physical energy. You accomplish things physically, building up your body. You accomplish things mentally by writing a book, propagating a theory, excelling at your work, and then accomplish things spiritually by becoming closer to God, closer to Jesus, or whatever your religion is. So I think this was an important story that he told about this woman who was spoiled in a previous life, but she realizes that in her previous life she neglected this whole spiritual sector of her being. But hey, I guess that it is better to be late to the party than not to even go to the party. So it's better that she is dealing with this now than never having had to deal with it. Free decision. This is page 69 as well. Viktor states, we have stated that which was ultimately responsible for the state of the prisoner's inner self was not so much the enumerated psychophysical causes as it was the result of a free decision. Psychological observations of the prisoners have shown that only the men who allowed their inner hold on their moral and spiritual selves to subside eventually fell victim to the camp's degenerating influences. They want you all to be the same. They want everybody to be sheep. One of the most depressing things that a prisoner had to deal with, besides, the horrible treatment, lack of food, lack of sleep, sickness, cold temperatures, was that you did not know how long you were going to be there for. And Viktor talks about this time warp that happens. You did not know how long you were going to be there for. You were not given a date for release. You didn't know when the war was going to end. You didn't know. And Viktor talks about how this was a provisional existence. A provisional existence of unknown limit. And I looked up provisional here. And this comes from dictionary.com. Serving for the time being, only existing, only until permanently or properly replaced, temporary. Temporary, but temporary is relative. Temporary could mean many things to many different people. Kind of like the suffering that we were talking about in the discussion. It's relative. You don't know how long you're going to be there. And he talks about the people who ended up coming into the camp, like the new people that came into the camp. A change took place in their minds of the men. With the end of uncertainty, there came the certainty of the end. This might be another question I pose to you guys. What's the difference between these two? What does Viktor mean by this transition of an end of uncertainty and an uncertainty of end? I believe this is where I talk about that time warp that happens. He talks about how when you lose track of time, when you don't have a finite end, when you don't have that knowledge of an end. You're not able to aim at an ultimate goal in life. He describes here, a man sees living for his future, in contrast to a man in normal life. Like an unemployed worker he was talking about. His existence has become provisional, and in a certain sense he cannot live for the future or aim at a goal. Probably because he does not know when he's going to go back to work. So until he has that figured out, he cannot think about starting that family or getting married or having kids or buying that house until that part of his life is solved. And how many times in our lives does this happen? I mean, how much of a motivating factor is that your life is going to come to an end one day? So you know that you have goals. We all got the same 24 hours. So we got goals in our life that we got to finish, right? Or we got goals in our life that we have to shoot for. Because that end is a great motivator. But if you don't have an end, you just walk around aimlessly. Time is non-existent. Time becomes deformed, as he's talking about. Deformed time of research on unemployed minors, inner time, which is a result of their unemployed state. Time becomes deformed. You have no sense of it. You walk around aimlessly. You don't know what to do with all this time. He was describing how prisoners suffered from this. A small time unit a day, for example, filled with hourly tortures and fatigue appeared endless, and a larger time unit, like a week, seemed to pass by very quickly. And then he talks about how tuberculosis patients, people are in an analogous psychological position. They experience a similar existence without a future, without a goal. And that is actually the end. That was page 70, a little bit on 71 there. But we got to bring up some challenge questions here. So, what was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you guys? Yes. What does the quote from and I'm going to butcher this name. Doestovski, what does he mean by that quote? Not being worthy of my sufferings. What does that mean? What was another? Yes, explain the dichotomy between the end of certainty and an uncertainty of end. That's a great one right there. We could go on about that. How about this? What did by time being deformed, as we were just talking about? God, that's a tricky one. We could do that one too. Death of Teheran. maybe it could be a short discussion this time. Yeah. Short discussion this time. Let's go with these questions. Yeah. I'll post these in the description of the videos. And we'll see you guys next week for pages 71 through 90. And I wonder, we're going to be very close. 71. How about this, guys? 71 through just the end, because then chapter 2 is right there. Chapter 1 ends at 93. So just finish out chapter 1, 71 through 93. And then we got chapter 2 the week after that. But thank you guys. This has been another episode of Chee-Tash. My name's Chris. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.